you know, I just despise the way that Nolan works. I hate his movies. I just don't think he really knows what he's trying to do most of the time, and I think it's, you know, he's very much style over substance, but the style is lacking as well. You know, Tenet and Inception, you know, I think he thought he was saying something really smart.
Ew, he did
really
Inception?
Funny. Yeah. But, you know, I think even in those movies, I don't really think... I don't really know what they say.
It is one of those things where I remember watching like the Dark Knight movies, and initially, you know, like when I was younger, or whatever, being like, oh yeah, these are cool, whatever, and then rewatching them and being like, these are fucking horrific, you know, like it's like this, it's like the only way we can win is with, you know, like authoritarian law and fucking, you know, like mass surveillance, and like we must, like, you know, like we use these like horrific tools, but we're the good guys, so it's okay, you know, and it's kind of like, oh, so yeah, ideologically, I always kind of, you know, like I find some of his stuff, I mean, it's like liberal kind of shit or whatever, because it's like, yeah, in line with what I would say would be like the law and order lib kind of perspective with a lot of shit. So I am interested to see what the Oppenheimer kind of, you know, the where that sits ideologically. But just in general, I would just think Christopher Nolan is like kind of one of those well, I don't know. So I haven't seen as many of his movies as I probably should before, like making a real hot statement like this. But I always feel like he is one of those kind of like dumb guy, smart guy, you know, like
like the Elon Musk of directors, kind of.
Yeah, or like a Jordan Peterson or something like that. You know? But I don't know. Like I probably haven't watched enough of his movies to like come out with a take that hot.
No, you have for sure.
So I went out with a guy the other day, and he was cool and based, but he mentioned, we were talking about Oppenheimer, and he's like, yeah, no, I like Christopher Nolan. And I was just like, there's the question that I tend to ask people before I go on a date with them, because I'm doing a lot of online dating and it's nightmarish. And one of those questions is like, what do you think of Aaron Sorkin? Which is like an obvious one. Like, if you like Aaron Sorkin, if you have any respect for Aaron Sorkin in any way, shape, or form, then it's not going to happen, right?
That is like such a you question as well.
I'm wondering if I should add Christopher Nolan to that as well. And then what do you think of Christopher Nolan? It's not as like, I don't know. It's not as obviously horrible like Aaron Sorkin, but
you could ask them. You could ask them if they think that Malcolm X is a crime movie. You could ask them that.
Yeah.
That's a good,
wait. Who would say such a thing?
Yeah, I don't know. Someone who's seen everything and done everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No, I feel like often I feel like some of Christopher Nolan's movies are like Inception. I was like, I like this, but then it's the stuff I like about it is also just in Paprika, the you know, like the other movie.
This is it. Paprika is a great film. I think that's the thing. Like, you gotta have, if you do a movie like Inception, you gotta have characters like Paprika. So just have Paprika, because that's the thing that makes Paprika. It's the characters, right? The characters in Inception are like, I don't even remember what any of them look like. I don't even remember what any of the fears or desires were or anything like that.
I couldn't finish Inception.
Someone mentioned The Prestige in the chat, and I remember really liking that, but I've only seen it the once when I was like, I don't know, I would have been quite young when that came out. Actually, maybe probably not that young, but like,
I think all these movies, what they all have in common is they're supposed to make the viewer go, oh my God, whoever put this together is really deep. It's really this is a deeper than my mind could ever be. I am, you know,
it's the guy that did like, you know, did The Beach That Makes You Old and stuff like that.
Oh,
like,
M. Night Shyamalan,
yeah. I feel like in a couple of years it's going to be like the same thing where it's like, you know, people will see Christopher Nolan movies and they'll have like, you know, like how for him it's like everyone's like, oh, there's like a twist, like what's the twist or whatever. Like there's going to be something for Christopher Nolan. It's going to be like
Christopher Nolan. It's going to be, how much can he make this movie about absolutely nothing at all? How much movie can he make without having any kind of message or anything like that delivered? It's Red Planet. Look at this. We're on the show. Hello, everyone. Bit of a movie. Everyone's talking about the movies, and so we thought we'd talk about movies a little bit. And how none of us are excited for Oppenheimer, but we're all excited for Barbie. So yeah, that's that. We're gonna kick off. Oh, sorry, Tim.
I was going to say, I was just saying before the stream started that instead of watching either of the Barbenheimers, I watched the new Netflix movie, They Cloned Tyrone, and it was a lot of fun. So I would recommend, if neither of those movies sound like interesting to you, then to watch that instead, because it was a great time.
Yeah, that one sounds really good. Really, really cool. And yeah, we're going to kick off the show in the same way that we normally do by asking our hosts what the most base thing they did this week is. Kira, what's the most base thing you did this week?
This week, I'm going to, since we haven't had a show for a few weeks, I'm going to pull from the most base thing I did a couple weeks ago, which is the fundraiser that I was talking about a bunch. We were trying to raise $10,000 in one day for our friend Rael to be able to start his life and to get out of a red state and be safe and actually not just like, oh, I can eat, but, you know, be able to provide, to have a nice platform, launching off points so that he can be self-sustaining and do stuff that he wants to do. And so we were able to reach 10K in one day, thanks to all of you who promoted, all of you who showed up, all of you who donated. Thank you so much. We raised even more than 10K. It was slightly more. So thank you so much. And I'm really just proud of us. So yay.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. And best of luck to them in their new setup, the new life. That rules. What about you, Mule? What was the movie? Oh wait, did I cut you off? Sorry.
No. I was about to lead into asking the next person. Don't worry about it.
Okay. I just snaked it. I snaked your little segue. Mule, yeah. What's the most base thing you'll be doing?
So, it's been a bit of a weird couple of months. I had like a few horrible things happen, but I'm still here and I'm still going, and I managed to support some people with their Section 21s still. So even though I've had this like pretty hanging post-viral fatigue, I'm pretty certain that I had COVID, and just after it I've kind of developed like long COVID, and it's just taken like a long time to get out of my system. So it's been a bit of a struggle. I've not been able to go to the gym. I've not really been able to do a lot of stuff. I've not been streaming too much, but this week just gone, I have got back to streaming. Obviously, I'm here on Red Planet as well. So I am feeling like very, very much better. So that's a base thing, I guess, knowing where my limits are in terms of health, making sure that I'm not beating myself up mentally. I've actually been taking a lot of time to meditate. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but meditation cures all of your mental health problems, and you don't even need to do any therapy or anything. No,
wow, I've heard of this.
Yeah. But it has been really good. It has actually been really good sitting down and getting back into meditation and stuff again, because it does something. It definitely does something. It relaxes you. It helps you sleep. It it's really, really good. So that's been really base. But yeah, I think the most base thing has definitely been helping. There's been a couple of people, like one person who's directly in the Red Planet and DJ Mule community that I've helped with their Section 21, just giving them advice and just kind of sitting down and making sure that they know their rights, and eventually it's come around to the fact that one of them is not resisting their eviction. They've had like something else come up, and that's great. But then the other person that I've been helping, who is not in the DJ Mule Red Planet community, that's a bit more of a sensitive sort of situation. So that's been a bit more difficult, and that's kind of ongoing. So yeah, just standard renters union stuff, really. What about you, Tim?
I was just thinking about this earlier, and for this week, it's definitely the other day there was a huge disruption on all of the public transport the other day, because there was a shooting in Auckland, and it was by the big train station in town where all the trains kind of come and go from. So they stopped it down. So because I was catching the train into work that day, and so I ended up at the train station, and there was just this old guy there who, he didn't really know what was going on. He was waiting for a train as well. And I could kind of tell that he was a little bit like, didn't know it was up. Because so I went over and had a chat to him. He's an old Fijian guy. I think he said he was 65. So he was like, an older guy, whatever. He didn't speak great English. And I just kind of had a chat to him, and I was like, hey, this is what's happened. This is why, the train's going to be late or whatever. And then we sat there for like, I don't know, it would have been like 20 or 30 minutes and just had a bit of a chat, and he just started asking me things about, like, I mean, obviously, like he probably doesn't know anyone to ask, so just stuff like he's asking me about, like, he was like renting, you know, like a house or whatever like that, and it really sucked, and it was like cold and all this kind of stuff like that. So I just talked to him for a little while about, like, you know, his rights as a tenant, and we have this like kind of thing, like this healthy homes kind of thing in New Zealand, where it's like landlords are supposed to, you know, like a house has to be insulated to a certain level and all this kind of stuff like that. And like told him about, like, we have like a citizens advice bureau, which is like a thing that you can go to, you can get legal advice and all this kind of stuff, and there's one like not too far away. So it's like, this is where you can go, you know, you can have a chat to them, and you know, all this kind of stuff like that. And just like one of those like casual interactions where it was just like, oh yeah, there's like people like in your neighborhood or your community and stuff that you can probably just, like, you know, like if you just have a chat to them, like we can probably help each other out in even just like little ways or whatever.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That was just yeah, that was just like a couple of days ago. And yeah, I don't know, one of those little things where it's like, it just felt really positive going away from it, being like, I hope he sorts it out, you know.
Yeah, you make like a genuine connection. Like one of the big things I've been thinking of: communism and anarchism, anti-fascism. They're all ideologies that are based in like love and compassion for your fellow human, right? And even further to that, animals as well, right? So, you know, the way that we fundamentally think about each other should have that very direct personal connection. And just like you say, just sitting down with this older fella, even though like he's not from, you know, the same place as you found it like not that easy to communicate with him, but still, like, you know, you got through it, and you know, helped him realize what his rights were. That like is a very deep human, like, loving act, right? It's a compassionate, beautiful, loving act, and I think that's awesome, Tim. Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, and I feel like it's you know, it's like sometimes you don't need to actually sit down with someone and, you know, like say like communism or anarchism or anarchy or anything like that, but it's just like you can just like help someone out in you know, just like a little way that is like helpful to the overall thing, you know. But yeah, but it doesn't have to be anything major. It doesn't, like, I mean, there's no harm in being like dropping the C-bomb or whatever there, but just it wasn't super relevant, you know. But
yeah, of course.
Yeah, you know. But yeah, all right. And so yeah, Soph isn't joining us today, but she'll be around, I think, next time, so you're good. So instead we should just get straight into the news,
or we should take a little look at the based viewer that we had. Our based viewer from the last couple of weeks is based viewer Molly. So on the 28th of June, she helped to organize the a marking of the Stonewall riots with one of the most prominent leftist youth parties in Norway. It was organized in order to point out how Pride has evolved into a celebration to celebrate homophobia being over in Norway, rather than pointing out how they still have far to go in terms of rights for LGBT plus people. Further, activism has been a boon for her mental health, and our continued outstanding work, she says, with Red Planet is what inspired her to get more active. Well, Molly, thank you so much. Really appreciate
awesome.
You you know, writing into us. And yeah, absolutely fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much. If you have been doing some base stuff, we want to know what you've been doing. You can message us on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, send an email to based@redplanetshow.com. Include your name, your pronouns, and if you're cool with it, we may shout it out in a later episode. So there you go. And now, Tim, now you can tell us about the what was going on in Paris. What's been going on in Paris? We haven't been around for a while, listeners, but yeah, we're going to keep you updated still, even though we probably kind of updated on this.
Yeah, this was happening like over the last couple of weeks or so. It's kind of been a developing situation, and it's, I think, like the riots are basically kind of like have wound down at this point, but a bunch of rioting kicked off in France because police killed a 17-year-old delivery driver, Nahil Mazouk. They shot him at point blank range as he drove off from a traffic stop. Well, that's, like the story that he was like, they pulled him over and talking to him, and then he tried to drive away and they shot him. They shot him from point blank range, which is really close. That's like within a couple meters is considered point blank. And he was the second person this year to be killed by cops during a traffic stop. And 13 were killed in the same way over the last year. And so he was a young delivery driver of Algerian descent. And, there's a lot of Algerian people in France. There's a lot of North African people in France in general because of the French in North Africa and the things that they did there. There are a lot of, there's a huge North African and Algerian community in France. They are typically not treated too well by the police. Like, I know it's the same story everywhere, it's like the countries in the imperial core ship out the violence to the outside, import the wealth or whatever. And then when people from those places that produce this wealth come back into the imperial core to these countries, whether it's, by their own volition or not, they end up becoming, part of the oppressed underclass, particularly like uniquely oppressed, I would say, compared to the other working class people already there. But so French police initially said that Nahil drove his car towards them with the intention of hurting them. And this was proven untrue. Verified footage shows a cop pointing his gun at Nahil through the car window and shooting him at point blank range as he tried to drive off. So pointing the gun into the car, which is kind of like, just like, that's like even for a cop, that's like a really extreme act, to be like putting the gun into the vehicle. According to the public prosecutor of Nanterre, after starting their shift, 2 motorcycle police officers from the DOPC noticed a Mercedes-Benz A-Class with a Polish license plate driving at high speed in a bus lane, driven by a young-looking person at around 7:55 a.m. The motorcyclists activated their warning signals, audible and visual, and indicated to the driver at a red traffic light to stop. The vehicle restarted and ran the red light. The police officers followed the car and alerted their superiors via radio. The car committed multiple traffic violations, endangering a pedestrian and a cyclist. Due to traffic congestion, the vehicle was eventually forced to stop. The police officers got off their motorcycles, pointed their guns at the driver, and ordered him to turn off the engine. Instead, the vehicle started to pull away, and one of the police officers fired a shot at the driver. The vehicle continued its route before crashing into street furniture at 8:19 a.m. The rear passenger was arrested when he exited the vehicle. The front right passenger fled. The police officer who fired the shot provided first aid to the driver. The driver was pronounced dead at 9:15 a.m. So according to the police, an officer fired his weapon as the young driver was about to run him over. So this version, citing self-defense, was quickly challenged after the publication of a video showing that the car was not in position to harm the police officers and was not heading towards them. According to Le Monde, the 50-second sequence, which has gone viral on social media, has literally swept away the language elements initially disseminated by police sources and repeated by some media. The video shows that the 2 police officers were on the driver's side of the Mercedes. The car was moving off when the police officer fired the shot, still at close range. So this was a crucial thing to the riots kicking off, when people realized that the police had just lied about it. Like, this video showed very clearly that, like, the cop said that he was like in front of the car and that the car had accelerated towards him, but then it was shown that he was actually to the side and pointing his gun inside the car when it happened. That kicked off first, and then people started kind of being like, hey, this is actually really horrific what's happened. But then a little bit later, so on the 30th of June 2023, a third passenger aboard the Mercedes testified that Merzouk received butt strokes. So that's when a cop hits you with the butt of the gun. So according to this witness, the third butt stroke made Merzouk release the brake pedal, causing the car to move forward, given that the gearbox is automatic. So it wasn't that he tried to speed away, it's that when the police officer hit him in the face, his foot came off the pedal and the car went forward, which is like exactly what, an automatic car would do. So According to BFM TV, this version differs from that put forward by the police, as according to Laurent Nunez, the driver had first turned off the engine, restarted the vehicle, then left. It was in this context that the police officer used his firearm. So the police said that he started he had turned the car off and was sitting there, and then he'd turned it on and then sped off, and that's when they shot him. But which is like a much more deliberate act as opposed to just the involuntary thing of someone hitting you. And, so the Paris Police Union says in a statement that police are at war with the anti-police violence rioters, who they're calling savage hordes. They also warn the government that they're engaged in resistance and combat. So this is the police union using this kind of phrasing, and it's much more than, like, normally we just see like the us and them sort of thing, but this is like people saying they are at war. And yeah, like the savage hordes, which I read an interview with someone who was a local they're engaged in kind of activism, who said that even though it's obviously full of kind of like dog whistles, in French, a lot of it is a lot more like dog whistles that they use over there specifically, that is kind of like baked into the language. It doesn't really translate well. And they were like, yeah, this police union statement is basically just like a very deliberate far right kind of manifesto saying that we are the police, and we are this that thin blue line kind of thing, where it's like we are the thing holding this country together. And even like a lot of the stuff about like the savage hordes and stuff, it's like they're talking pretty specifically about black and brown protesters here, the people, like I mentioned before, from North Africa, and specifically from like Algeria. Yeah, and that they're at war with them. It's not a case of like there's civil unrest. It's like, this is war. So they ended up putting a ban, like a curfew out on the streets, but the protests just carried on straight through them in several cities all around France. And it was so after the fourth night of rioting, it was like over 1,300 people had been detained. 2,560 fires had been reported on public roads, with 1,350 cars burned, and that there had been 234 incidents of damage or fire in buildings, which is huge. Like, this is like gigantic, and it's like, I think that this kind of level of damage is I think when you get to this kind of stuff, it's a very genuine expression of rage, right? Of it's like when people are setting fires to things on this scale, it's often like, this is the one thing we can do, like people don't have like weapons to fight a militarized police force or anything like that, but it's this form of civil disobedience, this kind of like wide scale and it's like a kind of vandalism more than it is like a very like like a planned arson thing or anything like that. It's just like this these things, like these roads, these buildings, they represent the oppressive state, and it's like, this is the way that these are the tools that we have to fight back against it. So I think a lot of people when they think of fires during protest, a lot of people that don't really engage with a lot of the stuff will think of them in the same way as you think of fires in like just a regular arson thing. And I think there's hugely different psychology behind it. It's like a completely different thing. So like a lot of people quoting those numbers being like, this is how dangerous it is. This is like, people like often play up that property damage is like this, like the worst thing that you can do. And obviously, yeah, it would suck. Like, it would suck if it was like, your business to get set on fire or whatever. But like, there are legitimate reasons for people to be this frustrated and to be this upset. And you got to think about like the conditions that would force you to do something like that, and you think about like how these people oppressed by the French state every day, and how, you know, how many people are killed just for senseless reasons. Like, this is over a traffic stop. Like, yeah, even if he had done that, like tried to speed off from the cops or whatever like that, that doesn't justify being shot point blank, you know.
These kinds of actions are like deeply human, right? And capitalism is not human. Like neoliberal capitalism, of course it's a thing that humans do, but it does not aid the human being. It doesn't aid us in our progression. It doesn't aid us in our evolution or even innovation. And when you are fighting against something that is obviously causing these things, it's a human response. In an ideal world, someone's shop burning down wouldn't have that much of an impact on them. Like, you know, the community would come together and feed them and house them and clothe them and everything, right?
Yeah, or even just, you know, like the idea that it's like the you know, like that wouldn't, even if you did lose your shop or whatever like that, you wouldn't be completely destitute, you know, like you would be like you know, like there would be like, that wouldn't be the end of your life. But like the, you know, the reality is it's like under capitalism or whatever like that, even just like having a bad week can just destroy everything for you, you know. So it's like, imagine the frustration of a, you know, like a young Algerian person who has like seen so many of their friends killed over like absolutely minor things. Yeah, you'd probably be pretty keen to get out there and fight back in absolutely any way that you can, you know?
Right, you can't get that back.
I would like to add to this, because we need to move on to the next stories, but I'd like to add to this that so much of what the news is just regurgitated police reports. Like a huge amount is just regurgitated police reports. Knowing that the police lie all the time should immediately reframe the way that we interact with the news. And so just in case anyone didn't know that, I know everyone here listening knows that that cops lie, but also not many people know that so much of what mainstream media is just regurgitation of police reports and police testimonies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like journalists will hang out at police stations where they're known, and like ambulance chases. That's what that movie Nightcrawler is about. Like, you know, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it happens all the time, and
there's like a very like, I mean, this is like from the propaganda model as well, you know, like the idea that like the police are a valuable source for the media, and that when you like, to anger them is to possibly lose that source, which can be very costly for like an individual journalist, reporter, or like a, you know, like an agency, newspaper, magazine, whatever. So it's there's, even when an individual journalist or reporter, whatever, might not agree with, you know, like the way that they have to frame something or whatever, they end up often just having to do it anyway, because otherwise they could lose the source, or, you know, they might not get the story next time. You know, just like there's like a huge kind of there's a whole power dynamic going on there as well, that is just one of the many filters that kind of that shapes the media landscape. So yeah, but yeah, how about we move along, and Kira, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening over at Universal Studios?
Sure. So if y'all didn't know, there's big strikes happening right now in Hollywood. So in front of Universal Studios was going to be a picket line. So there's all these trees lining up where the picket line was supposed to be held. Over that weekend, somebody cuts these trees. Like, they trim the tops and really and they butcher these trees, completely like removing all of the foliage that would allow someone to receive shade during the summer, in the middle of a heat wave in California, 90-degree weather, standing outside, right? So this is like a really, really important, like very much needed shade, but somebody trimmed these trees. So at first, Universal Studios didn't take responsibility for the trimming. They didn't have a comment, but like people on social media were pretty suspicious and just immediately just pointing fingers at Universal Studios, because let's face it, that's probably what happened. In fact, Derek A. Hughes is a co-executive producer on Quantum Leap, who's also on the WGA board of directors, says it's just very suspect. If this was done by the city, why didn't they trim the trees on that side? And he points across the street. So only where the picket line was going to be held, and only over the weekend right before the picket line was going to be held, these trees are trimmed. So on Tuesday, Kenneth Mejia, the LA city controller, announced that his office would investigate the tree trimming, as these trees are the property of the city, and they're also essential to providing Los Angeles residents, as he calls Angelinos, with significant environmental with significant environmental and public health benefits, especially during a heat wave. And according to Mejia, these trees are not the property of Universal Studios. So upon confrontation on Tuesday, Universal Studios responded, "We understand that the safety tree trimming of the ficus trees we did on Barnum Boulevard has created unintended challenges for demonstrators. That was not our intention." And then proceeds to say, "In partnership with licensed arborists, we have pruned these trees annually at this time of the year to ensure that the canopies are light ahead of high wind season. We support the WGA and SAG's right to demonstrate and are working to provide some shade coverage, blah, 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 blah." I don't think anyone here believes that for a second. And nor if you do, you should stop doing that, actually.
Yeah, like, I mean, the videos that I saw, it's like, this is not what a healthily pruned tree looks like.
This is tree killing, actually. This will kill trees.
Yeah, I did see people that, claimed to be arborists and stuff on Twitter saying that they were like, if I had pruned a tree like this, I would lose my job, So
yeah. It's basically just sawed off like every branch and made it's like a horrific sight. So, and it's also very suspect that coincidentally, your very, your care for these trees, salvation through high wind season happened to coincide precisely right before the picket line was held under these trees. So on Friday, the LA city controller, Mejia, I'm probably butchering his name, said that the company Universal Studios will now be fined $250, which is the highest amount allowed by law for a first-time offense. So it's clear that LA is identifying Universal Studios as being like big baddie here. But I also want to add that fines, once again, are just a reprimand for the poor, because this is nothing for them. This is nothing for Universal Studios. $250, it doesn't even register anywhere into the company as that even amount of money. So, it's a frustrating penalty, but it is nice to also have that kind of closure to be like, yeah, we know this was you. And the city knows that this is you, and it does not agree with what you're doing. So there's that.
Yeah, it is wild that it's like, I mean, it just seems like just such a slap, like $250, the highest amount. I mean, yeah, it's obviously, for a first offense or whatever, there's probably a law for that. But I feel like they probably knew that going into that. They were like, yeah, so they're just going to slap us on the wrist,
Probably, yeah.
If we do get caught, yeah.
Anyways, Mule, what's going on at Grindr, Mule?
Literally nothing good. No, I'm joking. Yeah, it's Grindr. I'm the queer guy. I'm talking about Grindr. It's Grindr employees. They're unionizing, which is really cool. I know that like Grindr is a bit of a joke amongst men who love men, and definitely trans people who use the app as well. It's a bit of a difficult thing to use, but I think that it's a really important thing to talk about, because the people who work at Grindr are people who work in general anyway, and I think it's great. So 100 employees have been signed up, including those in cloud engineering, IT, design, marketing, and quality assurance. They said the recent wave of political attacks on the LGBTQ community and the layoffs in the tech industry brought urgency to their campaign, which they're announcing to the company's management on Thursday.
Just to interject, I think you failed to mention that they're signing up for unionization, so they're unionizing.
Yeah, they're signing up to unionization, basically. That's what's going on, as Kira said. And they do have demands already. The demands include securing existing benefits, such as trans-inclusive healthcare, pay transparency, job security, and adding a worker representative to the board. Basically, we have a couple of quotes here from people who've been doing the organizing. Quinn McGee says, workers across industries are realizing that they should have a say in the conditions of their workplace. Quinn McGee is a Grindr product manager and a member of the organizing committee. This idea is having a resurgence that workers could come together to make sure we can protect each other from the vicissitudes, that's a good word, of the current state of things. As members and allies of communities that are systematically oppressed, we know that strength lies in working together, not alone. Employees behind the effort to unionize the LGBTQ dating app wrote in a mission statement, "We're already all in this together. We just want to DTR," which is dating lingo for define the relationship. And they also said to the board, "We are 0 feet away." If you use Grindr, you will know that as it's a traditionally gay cruising app, it tells you the distance away that someone is. So that's a little bit of a joke there, a little bit of an inside joke to the board members.
Yeah, I didn't get that when I read the article.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's really cool, and I think it's like really important. I think that, like, you know, it's if we take away the fact that it's Grindr and it's a dating app and it's messy and blah 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 blah, the long and short of it is that it's an app and it's a you know, it's the tech industry that is sort of like coming together and doing more unionization. You know, like a lot of people who work in tech, a lot of people who work in IT constantly talk about the ridiculous hours. You know, it's similar to like the gaming industry, where, you know, people are sort of like overworked all the time, desperately trying to, like, you know, do this programming and you know, fix these bugs and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's really, really good. It's kind of like just a completely necessary thing to do. And of course, like the fact that they are, you know, specifically, you know, people who are working at Grindr, you know, I would hope that they're all queer anyway, because they should at least be, in order to understand, you know, how queer people are going to be using the app. It's an app for queer people. But yeah, like, you know, they are organizing with the current attacks on LGBTQ plus people in the United States in mind. You know, they're thinking about all the things that are going wrong, the people who hate us, the people who want to see us erased from society, and they're noticing that, and they're sort of making a stand with that in mind. I don't know how based that's going to end up being, if they're going to end up, I don't know, making some kind of statement about queer people owning the businesses that are for them. You know, I mean, there's definitely like things in an article in the Los Angeles Times about that. I was reading it earlier, but I've missed the bit that says it. But I just think it is like really important for you know, queer people to manage queer apps specifically, you know, and to come together and especially unionize. But that's that. That's the Grindr staff unionizing. Good for them. We'll be keeping an eye on that as Red Planet. But finally, let's have a look at something a bit bigger than that. Kira, tell us about the UPS Teamsters.
I would be delighted, Mule. Thank you. So the UPS Teamsters are getting ready for a massive strike. I'm personally so excited for this. This strike is something, in my personal opinion, doesn't reflect the opinions of all of Red Planet, but they can chime in if they agree, is something that could be the precursor to a general strike.
Agree.
Okay. So the Teamsters represent more than half of UPS's workforce, and they're in the largest private sector contract in North America. So we're talking around 340,000 workers, and these workers are working critical jobs that keep capitalism afloat, you know, like delivering packages. So many companies, so much of capitalism relies on packages being delivered in a timely fashion and delivered, period, right? UPS delivers around 25 million packages every day, and they represent about a quarter of all U.S. parcel volume. So this is a massive chunk of capitalism that is gearing up to strike. It's very exciting shit. So UPS Teamsters have demanded that UPS reach an agreement with them by the end of July because their contract expires August 1st. So this is coming up very soon. And so if the UPS corporate doesn't come to an agreement with the Teamsters by July 31st, then the Teamsters are going to strike. Even more exciting is the union representing the UPS pilots say that they will also not cross the picket lines if Teamsters drivers and package sorters strike, which will result in the immediate shutdown of the express logistics company's global air operations. So we're talking a massive chunk of capitalism shutting down potentially August 1st, which is extremely exciting. Scared little scumbags as they are, UPS said that it is now going to begin training non-union employees to prepare for this strike. And they claim that this is not them trying to wriggle out of any sort of negotiations. They claim they're still very much good faith. They're just trying to take precautions. But the results of all these negotiations, these failed negotiations, I think speaks volumes differently, because it doesn't seem like, according to the Teamsters, that corporate is actually cooperating at all. And so kind of don't want them to. I kind of want the strike to happen. Like, I want the workers to get what they want. I think there's both sides. Personally, this is my personal opinion, I think both outcomes is going to be great. Either the Teamsters get what they want and we see a ton of workers be able to win their demands, right? But if they don't, if their demands are not met, we're going to see a massive part of capitalism shut down at the end of the month. So very, very excited to see what happens with this.
Yeah, I think I echo everything that you're saying there, because it's just so like, yeah, there's so much of it, right? It's like, God, what they operate in almost every industry, right? It's like delivery of construction materials, delivery of, gas, delivery of oil, delivery of just everything. If you could think of something that's getting delivered, it's done by UPS, like, and just so much stuff relies on it. So it's just incredible.
I would say also that if you're looking to get something delivered and you can manage to get it delivered this month instead of waiting till next month, it might be a good idea to get it this month. We might see some delays. We might see some, I mean, it's great to always put pressure on that industry, right? Be like, hey, where's my package? Blah, blah, blah. Because, it really reinforces to corporate how much they fucked up by not meeting the demands of the union. Yeah. But if you're actually like really do need something, I would personally suggest that you probably order it before the end of the month, or have it delivered to you before the end of the month, I should say. Yeah. So
defo, I agree. Yeah, that is the news for this episode. It's time to segue. It's time to get right into the main bit of the show. I don't know if there was an intro written to the show, but there's a bunch of notes. But I guess I could just real quick
give us an intro.
Yeah,
just freestyle it.
Intro off the top of the dome. Isn't it cool when people are queer? I'm queer. Are you? Well, if your answer to that is yes, then you'll love this bit that we're going to do now. Don't you love it when you go to the bank and they got the pride flag all wrong? It's not the right colors. It looks kind of weird, and they didn't really try that hard. It's almost like they didn't even consult any queer people when they did it. Well, that's called pinkwashing, and they don't give a shit about getting the colors on the pride flag right. All they care about is, can we make gay people give us money, and can we make sure that the people think that we're a good company because we allow LGBTQ plus people to be around us and kind of use our services a little bit with not that much oppression, but still a bit of oppression. Don't ask any transgender people what it's like to bank with us. That's what we're talking about today. And Tim's got a whole bunch of stuff written down about pinkwashing. How was that?
That was fine.
It was an intro.
It was one of the intros of all time, wasn't it?
There you go. Listeners, consider yourself introduced. So we got some kind of rough notes about what pinkwashing is, where the term kind of comes from, and how you might have seen it manifesting, especially around Pride Month. Basically, like, yeah, every year there's something new. Some corporation has found a new way of cynically weaponizing, queer identity. So, yeah, let's start talking about it. So yeah, like Mule was saying, it's usually what we call pinkwashing is like when a company that probably doesn't actually care pretends to care, but as a reaction to the market, I'd say, so when it becomes profitable to, proclaim some kind of, like queer identity or whatever, you might see a company all of a sudden, put up a flag or whatever. And this could be anything from like something to lure in new customers, or it could be like over here, there is a group that you can buy a rainbow tick. So that's like a little badge that you get to put on all your advertising stuff to say that you are, you're a big fan of the gays, and that that you're a great ally. It just costs money. You just pay. It's like $10,000 that you pay to this organization that kind of suck. It's like just a bunch of rich people that kind of, have a little board together. It used to be tied in with the people that ran Pride, but a few years back there was a big split over here when all to do with kicking the cops out of Pride that some friends of mine were involved with. And when they kicked the cops out, it kind of split into two different ways. And there's kind of like liberal, kind of like shitty Pride that don't really, they're not really community focused or whatever. And then there's like the actual kind of community one that is like run by, working class queer people. And there's like a lot of cool workshops and things like that they run. So, yeah, so basically the shitty liberal one, you can just, well, they're not even that liberal. Like a lot of them are quite conservative, like conservative, like white queer dudes who you can pay them a bunch of money, you get a little tick on your business, and you don't have to do anything else. That's it. All of a sudden you're an ally. You've paid the fee.
You know what it's kind of similar to? It's kind of similar to like carbon credits, right?
Yeah. Or over here there's like a kind of thing for different meat standards or whatever, and it's like literally just like it's like the Heart Foundation as well. Like you just pay the money, and they're like, yeah, this is good for the heart.
It's good for the heart, even though it isn't. There's just nothing. Yeah.
In reality,
so ridiculous.
It's nothing. So yeah, it's the same thing, and it's like a lot of these companies not only fall short in kind of helping or like kind of I guess like supporting the queer community, but like a lot of them can even have policies that actively harm queer people, whether it's from like exclusionary kind of hiring practices, or even like I know friends that have been denied like mortgages and bank loans and stuff because they don't recognize a like a queer relationship in the same way that they will like like a straight marriage or whatever. So yeah, there's like plenty of different ways that can kind of manifest.
There's one that I want to, so one thing I think sometimes people miss stuff like this, and this is related to something that we spoke about on a previous episode when we were talking about what trans liberation looks like with Katie Montgomery, and we spoke about corporations sponsoring various hateful media outlets.
Yeah.
So like for example in Manchester there's a sort of trans pride festival called Sparkle that happens every July, and they were sponsored by Sainsbury's, and I think they're sponsored by Sainsbury's every year. They're like a grocery store chain in the UK, quite a big one, and Sainsbury's have also repeatedly used adverts, like paid for advertising space in the Daily Mail, in the Daily Telegraph, all these different horrific media outlets where they demonize trans people. So that's like a great example of it. And just any kind of that's what it is. Tim got it in one. It's just making people forget that they are not inclusive, and just by like, okay, well, we spoke to the board of queers, right? We spoke to the board of queers, and they said that we're fine,
We called the manager, we got the little sticker, so we're good to go. So it actually a lot of people don't know this, but the term of pinkwashing, some of the we're kind of, I think it may have existed prior, but when it really kind of came to public attention is from a little while back. It was where is it? I've got it written down here. Yeah, cool. So in April 2010, Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism, so QUIT, quit, in the Bay Area, used the phrase pinkwashing as a twist on greenwashing, a practice where companies claim to be eco-friendly in order to make a profit, which is like, yeah, a huge thing, and we get that a lot here in New Zealand because it's like we kind of have this clean green image like on the world stage sort of thing, but it absolutely not. And like people, like businesses will just use clean branding and then like go back to just destroying the environment, So so it's very similar to greenwashing. So Danya Alwan was at a talk with Ali Abunama, editor of Electronic Intifada in 2010, when he said, "We won't put up with Israel whitewashing or greenwashing," and she thought of pinkwashing. In 2010, Sarah Schulman used the term pinkwashing in a widely read New York Times editorial, arguing that Israel used the tactic in its public relations. Schulman saw pinkwashing as a manifestation of homonationalism, the processes by which some powers selectively agree with the claims of sexual minorities and exploit them to justify racism, xenophobia, which is in brackets rejection of foreign people, and aporophobia, which is rejection of the poor. In short, the intersection between gay identities and nationalist ideology. Homonationalism shaped the concept of pinkwashing, and the two terms are often used together as tools to explain the actions of countries. Jasper Pua'a writes in a later article, Rethinking Homonationalism, that the two terms are not parallel, but rather pinkwashing is able to exist because homonationalism exists, which is like a whole other, that's like a huge thing when we start talking about homonationalism, which is like these intersections of, not just like, xenophobia and aporophobia are huge. Like you see that a lot, like in the instance that I was just talking about, like with the Pride board and the split between the kind of like the old Pride and the new Pride, where it's like one is stacked with, like kind of middle-aged and older white cis gay dudes that work in, like corporate jobs, and like they're doing pretty well for themselves, and then like the new Pride, it's like, like way more trans people, a lot less cis queer people, which is like, like not a bad thing or anything like that. It just happens that it, the more conservative elements of, of Pride have typically come from kind of like, white cis gay dudes, but, not to devalue the amazing work that a lot of like white cis gay dudes have done, but that's just kind of, how things fall. People that are marginalized due to their kind of ethnicity and, like even, when it comes to, particularly down here with like Pacifica people and Maori Indigenous people, there is, I think, a unique perspective as well that leads to radicalism, so like radical politics, and I mean refugees and stuff definitely as well. There is a huge refugee presence in the Pride groups down here, but so I think that it's like when we start looking at things through that lens, especially when we're looking at places like Israel, we start getting like a much bigger picture, which is where this like homonationalism comes in.
I think the Israel thing is such a good point. Sarah Schulman's an amazing writer, and I completely agree with the whole pinkwashing thing of Israel, because they often saying, oh my gosh, like you say that we're so bad for genociding Palestinians, but what if those Palestinians wanted to be gay? But the thing is that there are loads of queer Palestinians, and they often try to get to Israel to escape the hatred of queer people that unfortunately does exist in Palestine. And Israelis do not offer them asylum. And if they did offer them asylum, they still don't let queer people get married. There's these horrific adverts that you see, and they're on YouTube all the time, and it's vile, where they're constantly pushing Tel Aviv, and they're constantly talking about just how progressive Israel is.
Yeah, they call it it's like the queer capital of the Middle East and stuff like that. But it's it's very obvious that it's okay, only if you're a white Jew from Brooklyn, you
won't get the same. And also even then, it's if you were to live in somewhere other than Tel Aviv, you would probably have a markedly different experience, because at the end of the day, the sad reality is that queer people are gonna suffer all over the world for sure. And in Israel, if as they are specifically using it as this horrific way to sort of mask their genocide, certainly not in the name of any progressive queer people.
I also want to add to this that even for the white gay guy from Brooklyn, it's still not great. I mean, gay marriage isn't even legal in Israel, for the record. It's not actually an oasis for gay men at all.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the way that they try and frame it is that's pinkwashing, right? It's they will say it not even just as a lie to kind of compare themselves to a lot of the kind of Palestine or other Arab states around, or anything like that. It's this idea that it's they're even lying to their own people. They're lying to themselves. It's it means absolutely nothing, and it's purely just a branding exercise, really.
And I think the branding is such an important thing, because moving beyond the Israel thing and sort of moving back to corporate pride and what has happened with pride marches all over the world, specifically what you were talking about in New Zealand, Tim, and the way that things are in certainly in the UK. You will get BA weapons systems and Lockheed Martin desperately trying to put on these, and it's always the same. When I was doing the intro, I know I was haphazardly sort of doing a lot of improv there, but a lot of what I was saying was true. You will find these half-assed pride flags that aren't the correct colors, and they have maybe hired some graphic designer to do it, but the graphic designer is not queer, or they're queer but they've been told no, we don't want to make it exactly the pride flag because that would be too progressive, but we want to make it our own version. We want to make it the Lockheed Martin pride flag, which is the most vile thing to even consider, even as an artist. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Raytheon rainbow, the Raytheon pride socks stay on during sex, during the the no loads refused cum.
But it is it is a thing where it's the symbol of the kind of the rainbow flag, and this kind of the progressive symbolism of the kind of just that's movement to support queer rights and stuff is actually it has become such a marker for what people think of as progress. And so it's that's why a lot of these corporations will adopt it, because it's it is kind of, I guess it is a battleground that is being fought, that people want to be seen as on the right side. They want to be seen as as an ally, as one of the good ones, all this kind of thing. And that's why they adopt pride symbolism. It's whereas I think a lot more, and it's less risky, I think, for them, whereas or historically has been, more companies would be inclined to, like put a pride flag in their window than they were to put like a fucking like a black fist in their window during, like the George Floyd protests and things like that. But then I feel like it is changing a little bit though, like you see like these like conservative hate campaigns at the moment, like with all like Bud Light and all this kind of stuff. And it's like kind of like this ground that I, like I think it appeared had already been like the conversation had moved past this point. It's like being dragged back into like, like
this is why people like Dave Rubin, conservative queers are so desperately frustrating to any other queer person who is not as privileged as that, to anyone who understands like, what pick me means, because, our rights have still not been completely won. We don't have queer marriage in a lot of places. We don't have rights for trans people in a lot of places. Healthcare, trans people overwhelmingly, but even like sex healthcare for queer people, like it's been extremely hard for me. I'm a polyamorous queer man, and it's been really hard for me to access sexual, for STD tests and stuff like that. So things are not good. That we have like this sort of concession where it's like, as we've said already, if you're white, if you're cisgender, and you're a man and you're queer, well, we can handle that. Do you know what I mean? We can handle that because, well, at least you're a man and you've got your head screwed on right. You know what I mean? This is how people look at this shit. This is how people look at this shit. Like, they're constantly like, desperately trying to stop any kind of progression. It's like, oh, well, okay, there's the LGBT. And that's why you hear a lot of conservatives, they're desperate to like, well, we need to cut the T off the LGB, and then it's like the alphabet mafia. What is it now? LGBT 5XY 9Z. And it's like, what they're basically saying there, you have to listen to what they're saying. And what they're saying is, we don't want any more progression for the queer community. They know the queer community is more than just cis white gay men. Like, they know that, but like, they don't want any more concessions, because that's what they see our rights as concessions. And when it's being dragged back so much so, especially in the US, nowadays, like even in the UK, there are examples of it, less so in the UK, but definitely there's the sort of like weird disparity between like, horrific billionaires who wrote children's books talking about it, and then on the ground violence happening as well. This sort of like massive gulf between the kinds of people who do this stuff and the kinds of people who talk about this stuff. But it's happening. It's not happening. So and that I think that's another thing. This is why we wanted to talk about pinkwashing. We'd organized this episode for a couple of weeks before this, but I think it's still relevant for sure, because with the advent of Pride coming around and us understanding that like there are just so many vile corporations who march, the police still march in many Pride marches, and it's just such a joke. Like every single one of us who knows our history knows that Marsha P. Johnson was harassed by cops. A lot of people believe that's how she died, because there are no records of how she died. She was just found in a river, and there's every chance that the harassment from the cops is why she ended up in that river. You know what I mean? This is obviously speculation, but with the way that cops treat queer people, especially queer black women, trans women, it's more than likely, right? Just the mere concept of that, from Marsha P. Johnson throwing the first brick at Stonewall to where we're at today, where the police are openly marching. They're like, oh well, we have queers in our ranks now, so that's fine. It's just so vile. So just thinking about all the different I guess necessary steps that we need to take to kind of like remove these organizations from Pride and take it back to what it was to begin with, which was a protest. It's always been a protest, and I think that's the where you get these kind of like lib-brained takes. Well, they're not lib-brained takes. They're conservative takes, but they get translated into you know, liberal stuff where liberals are like, oh well, you know, we shouldn't have kink at Pride because oh my gosh, there's, you know, there's kids there and blah blah blah, this that and the other, and it's like, okay, listen, you know, no one ever said we're desperate to have kids at Pride, right? No one's ever said this. Right? It's good for kids to understand what queer people are. And it's fine for queer people, for kids to be at Pride, because generally speaking, Pride is not like a sex show. When conservatives think of these prides where men are having sex in the street and all this kind of stuff, they're talking about things like Folsom Street Festival, which is something that happens in a gated off community in San Francisco. And yeah, that's a sex party. It's a sex party, and you know, there's no denying that, but kids aren't allowed, right?
Yeah. So, and it's like a thing that has like existed for a long time, and like the community is like totally aware of it, and it's like just this one thing that is done at a certain place, a certain time every year, and it's like, it's chill, you know.
So you get these arguments where, like, you know, conservatives are trying to drive this like wedge issue. It's always protect the children, and that's what they're doing with, you know, with trans people and drag brunches now. It's like, you know, we got to protect the kids and stuff like that. But this is why Pride, you can't get around Pride being a protest. This is directly what happens when you try to corporatize Pride and allow these companies to pinkwash, because you get more eyes on it, right? You get more eyes on Pride, and then when more people are looking at it and they're going, oh my god, look at this, and it's like, right, okay, so, you know, straight people are going to Pride and they're supporting queer people, and that's great, but they're taking their kids and like, oh, what's going to happen to their kids, and so all these new arguments start to come up, and then liberals get carried away with it and they go, oh yeah, they've got a point there, but it's like, do they really have a point?
Yeah, well, there's this quote that I grabbed from there was a piece we spoke about on the news here earlier in the year when in Australia at the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, which is like their kind of pride parade over there, they Senator Lydia Thorpe, who is Indigenous Australian woman who she's an independent senator. She was a Greens, but she quit the Greens to go independent because they were too kind of liberal or whatever. And so she lay down in the middle of the street in front of a police float to stop it, to protest police involvement in Pride. And everyone was like, oh my God, like, what is she doing? You know, like, why is she stopping the police? And it's like, there was one thing I remember someone saying, being like, well, if you don't like what Lydia Thorpe did at Pride, you know, to the police at Pride, wait until you hear about what the police have done at Pride and why, you know, like even like the first Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras parade was like, they arrested like dozens and dozens of people and just beat the shit out of like literally like, you know, hundreds of people were injured by police then. So, and it's the same parade just years later. But yeah, there was this piece in the conversation talking about her doing this, and the way they said it was the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras parade since that time has raised awareness about the stigma facing people with HIV and AIDS, the fight for marriage equality, and the wider issues facing LGBTIQ plus peoples. Yet the parade as a vehicle for disruption to amplify awareness about intractable social issues can be at odds with the broader, ordered public relations objective of the Mardi Gras. This is only amplified in the global context of Sydney hosting World Pride in 2023. So it's like, this is the interesting thing, like the goal of it being like Pride, you know, the historic Pride as like a protest, as this kind of like this disruption, this thing being like, we're here, we deserve rights, versus this modern, like what they call the broader ordered public relations objective. Yeah, the PR angle, I think, is definitely the one that a lot of like the libs will go for. They'll say like, oh, this doesn't really help us because it makes us look like we're wild and we're you know, like, or whatever.
We're out of control.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, when stuff like that has happened, when so a friend of mine who disrupted Pride here a few years back, and had her arm broken. This is Emmy, who will probably be on the show at some point.
Yeah.
Soph's done a lot of stuff with her. The cops like broke her arm and like beat her up and all this kind of stuff, and you know, she had to go sit in jail without, you know, like with a broken arm, and like refused medical attention and all this kind of stuff. And all of the people were like, well, all the more conservative kind of queers were like, oh, well, you know, it's just such a bad look, like making a big deal of this and like stirring things up and all this kind of stuff. And one thing that I thought was wild was that there's like such a huge disconnect, because I know so many young queer Pacifica and Maori people from growing up, where it's like that's just the shit that would just happen to them like on the weekend, you know,
Right.
like they would just get like harassed by cops, or like, you know, like a young kind of like trans, you know, Polynesian person walking down Queen Street would probably get stopped by the cops and harassed and assumed to be like a sex worker or something like that, you know. And you know, that would end up with them, you know, possibly going into the cells or getting like hurt by police and things like that. And it's like, this is the difference between like the more kind of like the normie gays who just, they think that, you know, by disrupting the parade, that you're causing this gigantic kind of, you know, like this big like dramatic event sort of thing, where it's like, no, like there's like horrific things happening to the community like every day, like all day, and it's usually the cops are involved in that. Like a lot of the times they are. So it's kind of like, you know, like when you actually take a step back and look at it, it's like it's pretty harmless just to jump in front of the parade. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it sends a huge message, but it's like in relation to the harm perpetrated by the cops against the queer community, it's nothing, you know.
What's the harm? Like this I think this is
You're holding up the parade.
Yeah, what's explicitly missing from a lot of conversations, and this is done on purpose, because of course, if you were to ask what is the measurable harm that queer people do to the community, conservatives would say something like, oh, well, they you know,
breaking down the family unit.
They break apart the family unit and blah blah blah. But like, so they have this imagined harm, don't they, that queer people are perpetrating all over the world. And again, it's similar with, like, you know, libs will say, oh my God, but you're holding up the parade, you know. But then again, the question is, well, what's the harm done there? Well, like you said, you know, the parade was held up, and you know, what does that fundamentally mean for everybody? Not a lot, really. Your afternoon has been delayed by 20 minutes, and oh no, you've had to listen to the voices of black and brown queers. Fuck, man. Holy shit. Oh, that's so harmful.
And I think it also is that thing where it like turns the mirror back and shows, you know, like, and it can show people that are, you know, like still obviously like still oppressed and still, you know, like do face violence by the state and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, it can show particularly back towards, you know, like white cis people, that there is harm being done to their community, that that you are, you know, either ignorant to, or ignoring, or even in some cases complicit, because there are, you know, there are a lot of queer cops. So yeah, it's kind of like, I think it's one of those things that makes a lot of people really awkward. And it's the same with you know, a lot of kind of protests, like with like the Just Stop Oil stuff, with a lot of like, you know, a lot of the more like direct action vegan activism stuff, where it's like it makes people uncomfortable to kind of like look back at themselves and see the, you know, like what part, like what side are they on in this, you know.
Yeah, well, it's I think that's the biggest thing I think that everybody has to remember, is that even, you know, some of the older queers, like I'm 33, I had to think then, but you know, I didn't necessarily, like, I grew up in Section 28, and that probably harmed my development as a queer person, but I did not know where that came from, right? I did not know why there weren't any bisexual people on TV. I didn't know why, if there were bisexual people on TV, it was only ever women and they were overtly sexualized. So, but that is obviously all down to Section 28, queerphobia and stuff like that. And it's that mystifying of where, pride comes from, which really harms people, because you get these privileged queers, me included, who just did not see what Stonewall was. Like Stonewall, when you actually like do the reading and you learn about the history of it, and it's like, okay, well, the owner of the pub had to pay the cops every fucking week. It was a protection racket, so that the cops wouldn't just like bust in and start beating people up and all this kind of stuff. They were essentially running like a gang, but with any of the good things that gangs do, in the US specifically. Then one day, even though the guy had paid the money, they still came in and arrested a bunch of mostly black queer people, and it's just that kind of shit, right? It's just literally like that message, that thing where people say Stonewall is a riot, and even then they don't know why Stonewall was a riot. They don't know what happened, and then when you learn that it was literally that, like the cops just broke in despite having an agreement, a paid agreement, with the owners of the bar. They still came in and started attacking queer people. It wasn't even just an arrest is always going to be violent, but they were beating people up. They were women. They were young queer people, black people. Like this is the thing. And when you learn that that's what happened, and alongside that, the way that queer people had to live back then was just so far removed from anything that we could possibly think of. This is kind of why conservatives are so mad that we don't have to live like that anymore. There are lots of people who still do. Depends on where you live. Obviously, this is
absolutely
imperial core viewpoint. We're very lucky to have this in the imperial core, but we fought for it, and now we are seeing some people's rights get fucking completely And
Chloe mentioned something interesting in the chat, which is true, that based on what you were saying about about gangs, there were a lot of gay bars and a lot of just kind of like, I would say, like queer, like kind of like hangout places or venues were often owned by criminal enterprises around the place, because it was like not for them being like more progressive than anyone else, but just because it was like kind of like a speakeasy kind of thing, right? Like this is a place to earn money that is illegal and kind of like like has to exist kind of in the shadows or whatever. So a lot of the times there were like particularly in the States, and also throughout Asia and stuff as well, there was a lot of like really iconic queer bars where like they were run or at least like like the venue was owned by, and all their liquor licensing and stuff was handled by organized crime, and that was for better or worse. That's just like a thing that was happening at the time. That's another thing where it's like it was beneficial for organized criminals to make those business arrangements at the time, because it was like money to be made. And it's kind of the same as like these days, where it's like it's beneficial for a lot of businesses and corporations or states even to adopt like queer imagery, or to hire openly queer people to like prominent positions and all this kind of stuff, not necessarily because of for ideological reasons, but purely for, I guess, like marketing reasons. Like we see even with the whole thing with Dylan Mulvaney, how it was like Bud Light did a sponsored deal with her, and then when she got hit with so much heat from conservatives, and they didn't even like check in with her, like they just dropped her like immediately, even though it was like it was the most minor thing. It was only like one sponsored Instagram post. It was never like this like long-term thing, but like it was this tiny little thing that ended up in like these like just hectic hate campaigns, harassment, all this kind of stuff. And like they didn't even check in with her. And I know that like Bud Light do have like, well, Budweiser, like they have a history of being more progressive than a lot of other breweries. Like they're historically the one beer that would be sold in all the gay bars because you know, there's like this whole thing going back to Harvey Milk and stuff with that. But still, it's like, man, like if you really want to be an ally, you could have like, you know, you could have done a lot more for her, you know. Really just sum up like a little bit of what we're talking about. The whole thing was like you know, like a lot of these companies will they'll use like the raising the visibility, or they'll like be, you know, wanting to bring, you know, queer people out of the shadows into the light or whatever like that, but it's like with completely no kind of acknowledgement of the systemic inequalities and, you know, like the kind of stuff happening, you know, that leads queer people to be oppressed, you know, in the first place.
Absolutely. But, so that's like, yeah, that's why pinkwashing is really an insidious thing. And you know what Tim was talking about there, the Dylan Mulvaney sponsorship, that was also so completely fucked, you know, just dropping her straight away. And that is how, I guess, that's a really damning indictment on how fragile our acceptance is in imperial core society, right? Because when we're talking like people who were so mad that Bud Light decided to use a trans woman for a little sponsorship on Instagram, it's not going to be an overwhelming amount of the population. An overwhelming amount of the population doesn't give a shit. There are even some conservatives that just don't give a shit. They're just like, oh, well, you know, whatever. They're not getting too riled up about it. But like, you know, a lot of them were. But again, it's like a small minority of people who are so upset and angry about this, phoning in, you know, Kid Rock shooting a bunch of Bud Light or whatever he did, buying Bud Light just to set it on fire, all this kind of stuff. You know, that made them sort of drop it from the campaign and not even look at it, you know. And this has happened multiple times this year. We have had instances of like, mostly in the US. It's been mostly in the US. This kind of thing hasn't really taken off too much in the UK. I'm ready to be corrected on that, because it does surprise me that it hasn't, you know, taken off just as much. But
it didn't really take off down here either. But I think it is like America does, you know, it sets that kind of like global hegemonic kind of culture sort of thing. So it's like down here I did see conservatives try to do like, you know, they call it Bud Lighting, and they've tried to do it a couple times since then, and it's like it's a very concerted effort. Like they will be like, this is what we're gonna do, we're gonna, you know, like there's this new book by this, like, you know, this queer New Zealand author, and we're going to go and we're going to turn all the books around in the bookstores. And it's like a couple of them do it and they take a photo and they think they're really funny or whatever, and a bunch of people pat them on the backs, and it's just like, this just didn't do anything. Like sometimes you just go to a bookstore and books are turned around because someone picked it up and read it and put it back down, you know. It's like your protest is like so ineffectual that you couldn't even look at it and tell that it was a protest, you know?
Right.
Like,
exactly. What's the message here? I'm reading the blurb. I'm reading the blurb of this book, and it sounds really good. Oh, it's by this person. Great. Yeah. So you know, it's that kind of, you know, horrific kind of stuff. Yeah, I am seeing someone in the chat there just saying it happened to Monroe Bergdorf when she talked openly about racism in the UK. Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, Monroe Bergdorf is incredible. You should definitely go and check her out. She's just a really inspirational person. But yeah, for sure. Like, you know, it is going to have happened. I guess what I'm saying is not to the extent and not for the same reasons as the US, because obviously you get TERFs in the UK quite prominently being overpopulated with right-wing nationalists, and they tend to do more stuff like go to universities and protest. I've been to like a couple of these fascist sort of rallies and stuff, and obviously you go there and you drown them out, and there's only about 10 of them, and there's like 100 of you, and it's it's not too bad. It did escalate at Honor Oak a couple of weeks ago, when in fact it was even before the last show that we did, because I remember we spoke about some comrades of the show that have been on the show who were actually attacked at that incident. So there are things like that happen in the UK, but then not this, like, I think it is like America kind of being like very brand brained, which is really interesting, because it's just like, and again, it doesn't make any sense. It's like when Colin Kaepernick, was it the Nike thing? I can't remember. Like, and everyone was setting fire to their Nikes because he took a knee during the national anthem. Like, just completely absurd. And you're also buying these things and then setting them on fire. So you're not doing a boycott. You're like buying the product and then putting it down the toilet. It doesn't make sense. So anyway, it's a very unique, I think, sort of.
It's kind of like the corporations profit either way, it's like either the campaign goes well and everyone is like, yay, we will buy the product, or it goes badly and they're like, we will buy the product to burn it.
It's almost like they did this plan. They know that reactionaries will do this stuff, and they know that if they go the other way, queer people, progressives will be really good. But yeah, if we're gonna talk more sort of about like identifying pinkwashing and sort of identifying like what kind of, I guess, companies will desperately try and hide their their track record and stuff. Banks are definitely number one in my book, because I know that a lot of trans people that I know have had such a problem in trying to get their names changed with banks. And, they often have some kind of policy where they say, we're very progressive, and if you want to change your name, if you're a transgender person, that's completely fine. You do it really easy and blah, 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 blah. And here's the thing. I used to work at a bank, right? Years and years and years ago. I used to work at a bank, and the changing of names, yes, it's correct. It's not that difficult. However, for some reason, when it becomes transgender, when the issue is transgendified, right? That's when it becomes difficult for some reason.
When the issue gets transed.
When the issue is transed, all of a sudden, it's incredibly difficult. So for example, if people are sort of listening and not quite twigging what I'm talking about here, well, think about it this way, folks. How many times do cisgender people get married and banks change the names on accounts? That's happening every single fucking day at a bank. You're seeing shit like that happen every day. So why is it so different for trans people? Well, why not? Sorry, it should be obvious, I should say. The thing is with banks is everybody uses them. Everybody needs them. You kind of can't really operate in society. There are even places now that don't take cash. So you will be like excluded from a bunch of places in society if you refuse to use a bank.
Online shopping relies on a bank. You need to have a bank to or some sort of a connection to a bank.
Exactly. And imagine if you're a trans person who's not feeling quite safe or quite comfortable to go out and buy clothes at, somewhere where you could try them on and stuff like that. And you gotta get fucking, shit online and stuff. That's going to cause so many problems. So I think banks are like one of the worst offenders for sure. Then you've got like, I don't know, like I think the step above that is obviously like, weapons manufacturers, isn't it? Like these kinds of companies where I guess it's like, because it's like, oh, we're progressive, we support the gays.
Yeah.
So don't think about all the black children that we kill, right? That's kind of what the pinkwashing is there. It's less that obviously there are going to be queer people in the countries that the Imperial Core are at war with, and their lives will be intrinsically fucking hurt. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think more specifically, it's kind of like, oh, well, we're progressive, we support the gays, so don't think about the people of color in the Imperial.
Similarly, is like we allow gay transgender people in the military, so this means that we're progressive.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's a thing where it's like when you like to be like to be politically radical and queer, it's like you have to really examine your, I guess, your relationship with, with the state. And, and I think it's like, there's only so far you can go with that before you start getting to like imperialism and things like that. And you see like how, okay, well, your struggle is also aligned with, the struggle of Palestinian people and, occupied Palestine and all this kind of things like that. So it's like very hard to like, not, like to see those parallels and not, and just be like, oh yeah, well, but yeah, I could go work for Raytheon, it's like, yeah, it's, yeah, I don't know. I don't see, I feel like it's like very hard to reconcile that kind of thing, while still being, I guess, authentically like progressive or radical,
There's also, I guess, like the step below, I guess, banks, what other stuff? I guess like cops is another one, right?
Yeah, cops are a huge one. It's like, I mean, it's like what we were talking about earlier with the Pride Parade and like the violence that the police kind of perpetrate in queer communities. They'll do that shit, and then they will like, Pride Month, we get like rainbow cop cars. Like we literally get like, like, and it's like, well, it's just like, what does this do? Like, what is this? Like it's like, wow, cool. The the stormtroopers have like rainbow helmets now, like sick. Like the people that are breaking our arms or whatever, they they got the rainbow tick. Like cool, sweet. Like it's not it's not gonna stop them from like harassing, like trans sex workers on fucking K Road or out, like whatever. It's like they're still gonna do the exact same bullshit, but they're, I don't know, like maybe they're gonna get a little bit more job satisfaction out of it because they think they're like good guys or whatever. Like it's, yeah, it's ridiculous. It's probably, and it's like the most offensive, I would say, particularly for, to see them doing this when it's like particularly to down here, like the way that police interact with trans Maori women, and the way that like a lot of them will still get arrested and put in like men's prisons and things like that for, like these people to then say that they're allies or like, like anything like that. It's like, no, like absolutely fuck off. Like, and I mean, just in general, like, I mean, I'm always bringing up about how disproportionately incarcerated Maori are, particularly Maori women. And it's, like, I don't think there's any reason to trust police about anything as a Maori person. But, yeah, particularly when it comes to this. Yeah.
A great example of sort of the police saying that they, love queer people and want to protect queer people was recently in the gay village here in Manchester. We had a gay sex shop get vandalized, had its windows broken. Just basically some chuds on bikes came and stopped by and broke the windows with like a big sort of iron pipe. And essentially, like, it's just such an unfortunate scenario, because here's me, this radical queer guy, and this is a shop where I go to get my shit. I get my stuff from this shop, and I go in there with my friends, I go in there with my partners, and this, that, and the other. And it's like, I just don't know what to say to these like cis white gay guys who are desperately saying, we need more police looking after our village. There is a sign, and you can Google this. You could probably Google this for everywhere in the world. It will say, if you Google Manchester UK gay village CCTV, and it will come up with this sign that we have in the gay village where it says, you're in Manchester's gay village, smile, you're on CCTV. So this pervasive panopticon sort of statement right there, saying like, you're being watched, you can do your weird little sex parties, your little silly queers, but you're being watched. You better watch it. They kind of say that this is because, oh, we're protecting the queer community. we're here to look after the queer community. We want to be looking after them. But when
this Christopher Nolan brain, like, oh, the only way that Batman can save the day is with mass surveillance.
It all goes back to Nolan.
We need these tools. It's okay because
everything is Nolan.
Yeah, it's okay when we do it because we are protecting the queer community.
Yeah.
You know, like that's it, right?
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, this thing happened where these chuds broke the window, and these cis white queers were like desperate for more police protection. Now, I was saying, along with lots of other people on social media, the police are not gonna save us. What needs to happen is a systemic upheaval of the media that makes people like this hate us, and we need to protect ourselves. We need queer people to be aware of this stuff going on, and we need to organize and make sure that we have a resistance to this, because that's the only way that we've protected ourselves for years and years and years. That's the only way that we're ever going to protect ourselves. Now, the police put a squad car outside this sex shop, and I walk past this squad car every day for a good few weeks, and there was no one in it, and there were no police around it. So what they did was the absolute bare minimum. And of course, when these chuds came to smash this sex shop's window again, they went, oh, there's a cop car. Oh, there's no one in it. Brilliant. And they smashed up the fucking windows again. So, it's just, it's so obvious that the police don't, protect us in any way, shape or form, no matter where you are in the world. If you're in Aotearoa, if you're in the US, if you're in the UK, if you're all over the world, ACAB. So yeah, I guess fundamentally, I think that it's important to identify the pinkwashing of institutions, first and foremost, because of course, like the military industrial complex, the military, and of course, like healthcare as well. Like, we've spoken about the police, healthcare as well. Like the NHS is very big. Of course, the NHS has like a pride float, and all this stuff. And it's like, well, the NHS is very much well known for basically causing the deaths of trans people because they do not process their healthcare, and it becomes such a back and forth, horrific scenario where trans people are either forced into doing DIY, or they don't know that they have those options available to them, and they suffer immensely. So the absolute goal that the NHS would have, a pride float, really. Now, the NHS might do decent stuff for people with HIV and AIDS, but it was very much not doing a lot during the HIV and AIDS crisis. So again, like that fundamental response to, did the NHS ever apologize to, the queer community for the lack of urgency at which they addressed the HIV AIDS crisis? And if they did, why didn't we hear about it? Did the queer community get to say, yeah, all right, they get to fucking, they get to march at Pride with us? No, we probably fucking didn't. So why are they? Yeah. So like all these institutions that are desperately trying to be like, look, it's fine for us to exist. It's fine for us to, be at Pride because we let queer people apply for jobs with us. How we treat those queer people when they're in jobs with us, specifically the police, by the way. The Met Police in London, they were recently found to have been extremely homophobic. They didn't include transphobia in there because possibly the investigation was transphobic, but they
oh, right, yeah.
So there wasn't like it's institutionally transphobic. Without a shadow of a doubt, they are transphobic. They're certainly queerphobic. So there's even the fact that they are trying to pinkwash with, which is like, look, there are so many LGBTQ plus, police officers. They still treat them like shit. So there you go.
Yeah. I actually, this reminds me, I forgot I just recently watched I think it's the latest season, or maybe the second latest season of American Horror Story. And it's all about like HIV and AIDS. And it's like, it kind of reminded me of that old movie Cruising, but it's about You know, like there's like this serial killer that's working through the kind of like queer underground in New York, and
That's
one
a
of
great
the
movie.
main guys is you know, a policeman investigating it. In American Horror Story, it's actually like a queer policeman who is like kind of facing resistance from the inside as well as the outside and stuff. And but the one thing that I thought was interesting, it is pretty kind of like all over the place this season. Like I wouldn't really recommend it unless you really want it, you were really into this kind of stuff. But there's like he at the end, it's like a lot of it was just like, oh yeah, and like HIV and AIDS is like just this really horrific thing by itself, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like this like crazy supernatural thing, and it's just like all these people that were suffering really terribly and just like ignored, and you know, all this kind of stuff, and it was like pretty horrific. But yeah, and it's a wild thing thinking like, oh yeah, you know, like it wasn't just that they were ignored, it's just, you know, there was like politicians and like famous like Americans and stuff like mocking the victims, and you know, like all kinds of stuff. And it was just like, you know, like it's like how do you come back from that, especially, you know, from the side of like the government and aside from like health services and all this kind of stuff, where it's like, you know, like this was like basically like a queer genocide.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just
And
like, yeah.
yeah. And I think it's important to point out as well that like, so me and Tim before the show were talking about Spike Lee, and I was watching a Spike Lee interview where he spoke about HIV and AIDS, and he said, because Spike Lee's kind of like he says some like interesting conspiracy stuff sometimes, but I think some of it veers onto the like, I think he's just being a bit of an observant guy. And he said, I just think it's really interesting that this disease came out of nowhere and it's killing all the gays, it's killing all the black people, it's killing all the Latinos. You know, whether or not that statement has any kind of, you know, merit to it, like I think he was implying that like AIDS was this created disease. Whatever you think it is, AIDS was certainly ignored because those demographics were suffering from it the most.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I think that you know, bearing that in mind, and yeah, just like the whole institutionalized response to you know, definitely like how queer people are treated and stuff. I think that's the most important thing to think out about when it's like you know, identifying pinkwashing.
Yeah, and I think that like that something like, you know, like what we were just talking about, that like kind of manifests as like a form of class warfare, right? Where it's like it's the ignoring it is a deliberate thing because it kind of, you know, it targets what they deemed as society's undesirables or whatever, which was like, you know, disproportionately poor, queer, brown people, you know, and it's a very, yeah, it's like the class stratifications in who was affected are like very stark. You know, it's like, yeah, it's wild.
Defo.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the next sort of thing to I guess go down the pinkwashing chain is taking a look at the kind of commodification of queerness in terms of you know, if we're talking about like because we have here in the notes pinkwashing exploits the power, I think the symbolic power, I think we kind of spoke about that a little bit, and the paradoxical nature of pinkwashing, but also, yeah, common tactics used in pinkwashing campaigns, rainbow themed merch, and corporate sponsorships of pride events and limited edition products. One of the most interesting ones. Now, I'm not too big on this because I've never really paid much attention to it. Even when I realized I was queer, I already knew that pinkwashing was a thing, and I never really bought into any of the stuff. My mum bought a pair of sneakers once that had like one of these cringe, not proper rainbows on, and she thought she was very progressive for doing that. And I didn't say anything. I was like, she's trying, you know. But like, I think that's like the most exposure I've had to it. But like, I know that the Skittles thing is like a whole thing, right? So what Skittles do, because all year round they're like, taste the rainbow, like that's their motto, right? It's like, taste the rainbow. And then in Pride Month, they're like, the rainbow is the LGBTQ communities now for Pride Month, and it's like, so wait, it's not ours the whole year round. Anyway, it's still yours the whole year round. I don't understand what they're trying to do with that, but okay. And they have this like blank packet, right? It's just like a black and white packet. But in theory, they should just have it like a completely like, or not even a white. It should have like a see-through packet, because like black and white are still colors on the flag. So it's like, what, I don't even know what they're trying to do. They're still missing it. They're still missing the entire message there. And that is, of course, just to remind people that Skittles exist, because I'm not being funny here. When's the last time you bought Skittles? When's the last time, you know, you were like, damn, I could really go for some Skittles? I know that there's some Skittles enjoyers definitely listening to the show and stuff, but in terms of like I don't know, like I always just like remember Skittles and associate it with like heartburn. You know, you like really? Eat like yeah, because like you like
maybe yam too many of them.
Well, you like yam like all the Skittles together, and you like make the big like Skittle homunculus in the mouth. And then
Skittle homunculus.
And then like, you know, you just eat it all at once, and then it just becomes a fucked up a fucked up time for your body. But yeah, I don't know. I guess my whole thing is like, well, you know, I guess I do get reminded that Skittles exist when Pride Month comes around, because people talk about it, right? Yes, there are people in the Twitch chat saying, Mule, this sounds like a you issue. We're seeing question marks. Okay, I get it. Yeah. But I guess the point I was trying to make is, like I say, I'm not thinking of Skittles every day of the year. And then every June, it's like, oh yeah, Skittles do that thing. You know, it's kind of like in the back of my head there, you know? And they do that because it's like, they want to be like, hey, buy our shit. It's never, they're never doing it. I think this is the real thing that people have to understand about when companies do this. They are rarely, extremely rarely, if ever, actually doing things that tangibly help the queer community, right? And, you know, if we're thinking about companies like Skittles that are owned by like massive corporations that are like definitely fucking the planet like 100%. Yeah, someone in the Twitch chat literally just said they're made by Nestle. So, you know, Nestle, famous for murdering indigenous people all over the world, and in order to extract fucking, you know, profit from various bits of land, and trying to steal water and all that kind of shit. Yeah, so you know, this is something to remember. They're owned by Mars. I think that we could probably attribute some of those things that Nestle does to Mars as well.
Nestle are like
Mars suck, you know. It's one of those like this is the overarching thing. We are fundamentally a communist show here at Red Planet. I don't know if anyone knew, but corporations bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a good example of the corporation's bad thing is one that I had written down here is Ben and Jerry's, because Ben and Jerry's are like quite well known. They're the ice cream company. They're quite well known as being like a very vocally progressive company, right? Like they, you know, have done heaps of stuff, like initiatives over the years, going back for a long time, to kind of show support or solidarity with the queer community, with even just like generally progressive social movements, everything from like you know, like abortion to like Black Lives Matter and all this kind of stuff, and they've always, you know, done stuff like that. But I think it's impossible as a corporation to exist at that level and ever actually be, you know, spotless, because like even like stuff like they stopped selling, I think they closed all their franchises in occupied Palestine territories and shit like that, which is like huge, you know. You'd be like, oh hell yeah. But then there was like a little while back, like a couple years back, there was no, not even that long ago, there was the New York Times did a big expose about companies that are profiting from child labor, particularly migrant child labor. And like Ben and Jerry's was like one of the worst out of all of them. It's kind of just like, like, yeah, cool. Well, this is, like, even though it does seem that like they, the owners of the company, like they are pretty vocal and they do, like have these really progressive views and stuff, by having this corporation at this kind of size and stuff, and to be as big as it is and to dominate the market in that kind of way, it requires a certain level of exploitation, right? um yeah, and I mean, even though like they have even spoken out about similar things in the past, but it's just like, well, this is the nature of it. So yeah, and that's capitalism, right? So even the good ones, it's just like, okay, but by your nature, there's like by your nature, you're going to be harming these communities in some way, just by virtue of existing at the size and all this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when you hear about like a lot of homophobia, queerphobia that comes from the imperial periphery because it's seen as like an arm of the West, like these kinds of corporations doing this stuff is probably like a whole big reason for that, right? Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, the West is constantly bombing the fuck out of us. Who are these companies that do this bombing? Oh, it's fucking, Lockheed Martin, and they got the fucking rainbow socks. Obviously, there's gonna be a whole heap of other stuff alongside it. It's not gonna be entirely that. Definitely loads of like queerphobia in the imperial periphery actually comes from colonization, which is a really important thing to remember, especially like looking at countries like Nigeria, like, and how wait, was it Nigeria? I think it was Uganda. It was Uganda, like the last indigenous sort of like sovereign ruler of Uganda was a bisexual guy. He was a bisexual guy. He had like multiple concubines of different genders, and basically Christians came in and they were like, this guy, he's doing some depraved shit. You better take him down and worship God, and yeah, that's kind of one story.
It's a familiar story all over
all over colonized world, right?
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of talk just over the last day or so as well about I can't remember his name, but the guy, he's from that band, the 1975, and they did a concert in Malaysia where Malaysia, there's a lot of like laws that are basically like, to repress queer people. And as a protest, he kissed his bandmate on the stage, whatever. And this was, like a lot of people internationally are like, yes, this is a powerful statement or whatever, but a lot of queer groups there, and even like people that they had spoken to beforehand had said, actually, you probably shouldn't do this because we're the ones that are gonna face the kind of like pushback from this, like this. And it's like,
it's a statement of privilege.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this thing, he gets to jump on the plane and like carry on the tour or whatever, like that. So yeah, it's like this thing where it's like, okay, cool, bro, like big up the gays, but like,
yeah, fuck you if you need protection getting home from the gig,
yeah. But what are you actually gonna do? Like once you get on that plane, what are you doing to actually like materially support the community? So
exactly.
Yeah, which is like it can be frustrating seeing these kind of things happen. And it's like, I mean, obviously he probably means well. I don't know anything about the dude, whatever, but it's just like, like just engage your brain, talk to the people, or like these people that spoke to you beforehand, or whoever, like they claim whatever happened or whatever like that. It's like, maybe just take their word for it instead of overriding them with your like Anglo authority or whatever.
It's a mixture of this immense privilege that comes from living in the imperial core, and just not really thinking about how your actions will affect people in the imperial periphery. And on top of that, I would argue that I think that pinkwashing will make certain people act like that and think that that is the be all and end all. of doing a thing, you know. And I think that kind of a statement as well, like, you know, a guy being like, I'm gonna make a big queer statement in this country and do this. Yeah, it's gonna be me. I'm gonna be the one to liberate these you know, I don't want to use the word, but you know what word I want to use, like from their awful society of anti-queerness. I'm gonna liberate them, and yeah, I'm gonna be the one to do it. It's mired in individualism, right? It's mired in I guess wanting to be the main character. It's this very neoliberal idea of like, yeah, I'm going to be the one to save these underdeveloped nations from their awful homophobia.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing, right? Like all these people like talking about like you know, saying like, oh, you know, well, like this white guy was just there to protest you know, like the like the shitty homophobic laws that they have and all this kind of stuff. It's like, man, who do you think gave them those shitty homophobic laws? Like, it's like colonization. This is literally, like, you know, so, yeah.
So bad, so incredibly bad.
Obviously, like that kind of step of colonization was like a phase of capitalist development, and you know, like what we're seeing now with kind of this like corporate pinkwashing and stuff is obviously just like, you know, it's just more of that. It's just more of that good stuff from corporations.
Yeah, I hope chat and the listeners at home are understanding, you know, the reason for this discussion and the importance of understanding pinkwashing. Essentially, this, you know, it's a very shallow, you know, thing. It's not even remotely affecting the queer community in the ways that people think it is, and it all comes down to the fact that you know, the way that things are perceived, the way that things are seen is all a result of the status quo, the people in charge, and the ruling class. The ruling class absolutely, you know, control the media, and you know that can sound very conspiratorial to you, but it's completely true. You know, I saw an amazing video this weekend. I was actually watching Zach App. Shout out to Zach App's stream when he showed us this. It was a video basically talking about how back in Nixon's presidency, there started to be a relationship between the US government and the media, and then lots of different governments picked this up all over the world, all over the imperial core, and then they started making like concessions and laws that would protect the media and just further the connection between the state and the media. And eventually that's why now you have things like Fox News, you have things like the BBC, you know, just basically broadcasting the most conservative opinions all over the world. But I think that the reason I'm talking about that is because the way that people perceive queer people is not by how many corporations are saying, look at us, we have a rainbow flag. Most cishet people don't even pay attention to that when they're going around. If they do pay attention to it, they're doing it in that overly kind of annoying, I really think I'm the best ally in the world kind of way, where they're going, oh look, this is so progressive, I love this. You know, if they are doing it, they're doing it like that, and that is neither helpful nor fun for anyone. And yeah, the way that you know, heteronormative society sees queer people is dictated to by the things that they're exposed to. So, you know, most very, very positive stories about queer people in media, if they are like films, if they're television series, they're very much like under the radar. You know, they are, if they're a popular show, 9 times out of 10 they're overtly sexual, and that reinforces the stereotype that queer people are sex objects, right? So, you know, you have to really look at things through the lens of like, is this thing portraying queer people as like normal? Is it like focusing too hard on them? Is it being hateful to them, etc.? And most of the time, the positive queer stories that like they are there, and you can find them if you look for them. One particular one that I would shout out is Tangerine. Really, really, really cool movie. Highly recommend it. It's about black transgender sex workers in LA. It's a really good movie, and even though it's kind of gritty, that is the reality that a lot of black trans sex workers live in, and it's an overwhelmingly positive story, which results in solidarity between women and sex workers of all backgrounds and stuff. Highly recommend. But I digress. If you want to find something like that, you got to hear about it on a show called Red Planet, which is a communist weekly roundtable show that is, we do all right. We have a good audience, but it'd be good if we could reach more people. I think it's wrong to say that. Anyway, I guess where I'm going with that is that that's the actual impact. It's nothing. It's little to none. You might find some companies do things like they donate a bunch of proceeds to the Trevor Project or something. Okay, that's tangible. That's cool, right? And it's something. But could companies do more? Absolutely. Corporations have all the power in the world. That's what makes the capitalist world go round. It's corporations. So I think you. Tim wanted to talk about this gay TM place or something.
that was probably something we should have talked about earlier when we're talking about all the ridiculous things that we can squeeze it in. Cop cars and stuff. So it was there was which bank was it again? So during Pride, this was and it's happened a couple of years. What was it? I think it's ANZ, yep. Have made a gay TM. They will take an ATM on a street and they'll just cover it in 1 year it was sequins, and then another year it's like rainbow flowers and all this kind of stuff. And it's usually just I think there's usually just one of them, and it'll be downtown or whatever like that. And so as a statement against it, one year a group, Queers Against Injustice, just poured pink paint all over it, all over the ATM, in all the buttons and all the slots and all this kind of stuff. And because they put out a statement saying that this is deliberately, this is pinkwashing. They said that they had co-opted gay symbolism for commercial purposes, using them to obscure their business practices and treatment of workers. It's but the thing is, the media actually put it up and they were like, this is a homophobic attack against the gay TM, the gay bank machine has been hate crimed. And they made a statement back to that as well. They said, it is disheartening that the representation of our symbolic pinkwashing of the gay TM has been manipulated into an act of hatred and complicity. This misrepresentation reinforces the image of tolerance that ANZ has spent a lot of money marketing to us. And it's this is the thing, they point out, they have marketed their brand of being inclusive to queer people, the queer community in general. But I think after New Zealand did it, Australia did it as well, and there were some protests against it then. But this was at a time where it was still queer people couldn't get mortgages together because it was it wasn't recognized as a marriage or anything like that. There was, it was really hard for trans people to change their names on their accounts and all this kind of stuff. But it was definitely championed by the very, what we were talking about earlier, the white cis gay kind of people who are, and they're invested in the worldview of the kind of things are better, and banks like ANZ have made it better for us and all this kind of shit like that. But it's it is pretty funny. The liberal response to it was there was a statement where it's this cleanup, like the adversity we all face, is only going to make us stronger. And all this shit where it's like cleaning up the painted ATM is gonna, like teach us the true meaning of friendship or something. It's just like, man, like, okay, well, what about like, like like cleaning up, like, all the fucking the bullshit, like we want to clean up the actual banks themselves, like that would make our communities like materially stronger. But yeah, no, it was yeah, seeing it branded as homophobia is just like,
I just love the fucking story. Like the gay TM has been hate crimed. I think that's the funniest shit I've ever fucking heard in my entire life.
Yeah, it's fucking wild.
I think it's important that we tell chatters exactly in sort of like the last bit of the discussion here, in actual ways that you can support the queer community. Because I think we will have a proportion of filthy cis heteronormative people watching us, unfortunately, but that is such as the way of life. And if you are looking for an actual way to support queer people, there are many ways that you could do that. You could join a trans mutual aid network and help trans people get access to things that they need that they may not be able to get themselves. You could be what is it, I've heard this called, it's called something different and I can't remember what it is. I think it's called like an advocate, but you would escort a trans person to like an appointment, like a health appointment or something. You could, of course, join the mutual aid fund and donate money every month, building up a fund where you would explicitly not be a part of that, but you would donate to that. And, you could donate old clothes, you could donate, old bits of makeup or whatever it is. All kinds of things are possible. And in terms of other things that you could do, I think just it's about, when I listen to like trans people, when I listen to like the shit that they go through, and overwhelmingly trans people want cis people, so not even just like cis het people, but even cisgender queers, to like have conversations with cisgender friends and just explain to them that there is no conspiracy to groom kids, and there is no conspiracy to destroy the family unit and stuff like that. It's about having these conversations and making sure that people really understand that trans people are not a threat. Also, I think another thing to talk about recently is because I think finally conservatives and Republicans shat the bed on finally getting mad that ace people exist as well. This is like a huge thing. Like, they're so mad that asexual people exist, and so what's kind of funny about that is that they're sort of still going with like the grooming children argument with this, that you're grooming my child to be asexual, and it's like, okay. So but obviously they don't understand, they completely don't understand what asexuality is, and they have no idea what that kind of is related to. But anyway, yeah, I think you gotta listen to queer people, you gotta listen to black queer people, you gotta listen to people of color as well, because white queers are not the only queers in the world, and a lot of white queer people get shit pretty wrong, and you got to make sure that it's a completely a broad analysis. Like, I think the thing is to remind our listeners all the time is that this stuff isn't easy. If this stuff was easy, the whole world would be communist, right? That would be it, right? You unfortunately have to listen to a lot of people and make an analysis and go with what you think is right. Like that's all we can really ask you to do. We're kind of telling you what we think is right and what we believe to be right, and we've done the analysis. It's part of our jobs. We're leftist content creators, we're activists. This is our opinion, but you have to like take in you know, a bunch of different opinions, and, you know, dare I say it, even some opinions you don't agree with, because those opinions could end up being the correct ones, right? If you find yourself having a conversation that seems to be challenging, if you're listening to something that sounds challenging to you, maybe it's worth listening to, and maybe it's worth going, okay, I didn't think of it from that point of view. And it's about, I think, broadly speaking, assessing harm. It's like I said before, like, if you know, an indigenous queer person, like an indigenous queer woman, you know, disrupting a pride parade, ask yourself what harm is there in that, right? And then ask yourself, well, what harm is there in claiming that all transgender people are groomers, right? It's pretty obvious. It's pretty fucking obvious, right? So learn to sort of measure the harm, learn to measure the benefit as well, I guess, because, you know, we've spoken a lot in this discussion today about how these I guess, just platitudes of oh, we're accepting, and oh, we're inclusive, and oh, we've got a rainbow on our cop car, you know, how they just do not do anything beneficial for the queer community. And if they do, it's something very, very small, like a you know, a one-off donation to the Trevor Project, or maybe a donation to Stonewall, or, you know, this kind of stuff. Yeah, so think about that, do some thinking, do some learning, you know, read some queer literature, I guess. I can't recommend any. Maybe the transgender issue. It doesn't really yeah, in fact, I think reading the transgender issue would be a really good recommendation for cis people if they want to learn more about trans stuff. It's written by a trans woman called Sean Fay. She's really cool. Check that out. And I'm trying to think of anything else, but nothing. It's a shame Sophie isn't here. She'd have loads more books.
Yeah, she's always got the books.
She's always got the books.
That's what they always say about Soph. Soph's got the books.
She's got the books. I'm sure she'll give us some books next week.
Yeah.
So we are into the question. It's question time.
I'll read the first question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yucca Mountain Johnny says, does the U.S. Democratic Party practice pinkwashing as a political strategy, or do they offer legitimate, though limited, advocacy for the LGBT plus minority in their coalition?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the only reason I'm laughing is because it's a very obvious answer to me. It's look, you know, it's a really good question, to be honest, because if you are brought up in the US of A and you think that the only way to do things is, you know, voting one way or the other, then unfortunately you have been lied to. You have got it wrong. That's not how we do anything. It's not how we achieve anything. The Democrats may make tiptoes towards queer liberation, but they are literally tiptoes, and
it's like with the corporates, it's a response to the market, you know, like they will make concessions when they're forced to make concessions, you know.
Right.
Yeah, they're not the vanguard, they're not pushing, you know.
Well, as the official American of Red Planet, my opinion, I'm an American. This is Mrs.
Wow.
Yeah, you have American friends. You can say stuff now about America. Yeah.
Mrs. Yankee #1 USA.
So my position on this is that the Democratic Party is just an institution. It's a business, right? And businesses need to stay relevant. They need capitalism in general needs to goes through a thing called recuperation, where it sees what people are wanting, and it sees the demands that are being made of it. And instead of just caving and being like, okay, we're not going to be capitalism anymore, it just tries to adapt to those demands and then just continually like evolve with the times to continue being capitalism, but then the cloak itself in different outfits and say different things in order to, you know, disguise what it's actually doing. So the Democratic Party for me, and I think many people probably agree with this, but I just like to speak for myself here. For me, the Democratic Party and liberals in general is just a reaction to the right. They just exist to be, we aren't the right, but we're not actually anything substantially different from what the right is. Like, we're not fundamentally different than the right, but we are the right, we are not the right enough that you have to vote for us. And if you don't vote for us, then you won't be getting the little crumb of rights that we're offering you. And so, like, the Democratic Party to me does not actually represent any sort of legitimate advocacy. However, there are real numbers. There is an actual, like, harm that is reduced. I hate to say it, but there are actual people whose lives will be bettered by the legislation that the scumbag Democrats will begrudgingly pass in order to continue their whole act, right? I would say that those lives affected are real, and I'm never going to say that that's not happening. But fundamentally, this is not an advocacy for queer liberation. Queer liberation will not happen through the Democratic Party or really voting for any party that's representing the United States. It's 100% a political strategy as far as I'm concerned.
And I think on top of that, the Democrats are constantly shaking hands with Republicans behind the scenes. They see them as their colleagues. You know, you see it all in, like, you know, the House of Representatives, the Senate and stuff. You see all this stuff happening, and, you know, they're constantly talking about reaching across the aisle. At the end of the day, these are two sides of the same coin. That's what you have to remember. Like, what concessions the Democrats will make in the eyes of Republicans when the Republicans get elected in the next election, then they will be conceded. Once they will be taken back once again. They will be put back to where they were previously.
The follow-up question from Young About and Johnny in the chat, he says, so consensus is that pinkwashing is a label that does apply to Dems. Well, as far as the Red Planet team as it stands here agrees, because I'm sure there's a position that could oppose ours, but I feel pretty confident that we're on point here, that pinkwashing absolutely thoroughly applies to the Democratic Party.
It does, because, again, you know, what is queer liberation? Queer liberation is the freedom for queer people to live as they are, as themselves, with the healthcare that they need, without discrimination, right? That's fundamentally what it is. And we do not have that. We are not going to have that as far as the Democratic Party is concerned. So it is absolutely against queer liberation, and it is fundamentally, it's pinkwashing. You know, it's again, it's these small concessions that they know that they can make. Here's the thing: what you have to remember is that if we're talking about politicians, and specifically we're talking about the United States, right? Presidents have a lot more power than what Joe Biden is saying he has. Joe Biden is constantly saying, someone should do something to look after these transgenders, Jack. And it's like, bro, you could do an executive
it's like,
order.
wow, do you know anyone? Do you know anyone that's perhaps the president of the United States?
Literally, you know, the first thing that fucking Donald Trump did when he got in power was abuse all these, like, extra powers that the fucking president has, which is like, I'm going to do these executive orders that means that, like, you know, all my friends, all my buddies that I don't talk about in the corporate world, they get a bunch of dough, you know, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, oh wow, so like a president can just do that. Crazy, huh? What the hell? I didn't know. So, you know, that's another thing that you have to remember as well. Like the kind of, like, it frustrates me so much when I see Joe Biden talk about anything remotely progressive, because I know he has the power to do far more than he can. And it's like he's saying, like, oh, I wish I could be the big dog, no malarkey, you know, let's go Brandon guy that you want me to be, but I just can't. I've not got the power. I'm just a little baby. Oh my gosh, you know. So it's just
a small bean.
He's a little small bean, isn't he? He's a tiny guy.
Also,
bean.
The last thing I want to say about this is the marketing of the Democratic Party is so pervasive that it might give you the illusion that they are anything remotely left. They are not. They are the right. There's the right, and then there's the far right. I would never say that any group in power that is on the right is actually doing legitimate advocacy for queer liberation. I would never say that.
Yeah, it's like that whole thing where it's like the political spectrum is kind of defined um by the establishment, you know? So it's like it's kind of like, oh well, if you're a conservative, you're a Republican, and if you're opposed to any of that stuff, then there's the Democrats, and that's it, you know? And it's like the liberal kind of like, view is like that's the whole spectrum, you know? Whereas obviously there's things far to the left of that or whatever, but they're never gonna tell you that in the on the TV or in the newspapers, you know? So it's kind of like it funnels people. Like there's a lot of people talk about this, a lot of American radical thinkers have talked about the way that the establishment politics funnels radical energy away from actual true kind of like radical leftist positions into the Democratic Party, and
Right.
And uses up these people, you know. And this is like a lot of people were talking about this after Bernie and stuff as well, about how there was like a lot of like really amazing motivated organizers that kind of like joined the kind of like the campaign and stuff, and then just got fully chewed up by by the party, by the system as it was. And then a lot of them just kind of like quit politics because they were like, shit, this sucks. Like I, have had my life ruined over this stuff, and we didn't even get there because our own party kind of sold us out, you know? And these are all people that otherwise probably would have like, gone into organizing in other ways and stuff. But it's just like they were channeled through the pathways that they thought were the only ones that existed into these positions that were ultimately kind of didn't really get where they were going to go. So so that's a huge thing as well. I think it's like it relies, like the establishment requires that kind of new blood, and also benefits from defanging people that could go on to become truly quite radical.
I think that's actually really sad. I think that's really sad. I think it's sad that like, there are people who are like, I'm going to do some activism, and that activism to them is door knocking for the Democrats. Like, I just couldn't think of anything worse. So anyway, the next question is from Sky Glittering. Sky Glittering says, any recommendations for real non-pinkwash queer groups people can give money to instead of corporations? So I know trans mutual aid groups in Manchester, that's in the UK. This is something that you will have to do like a bit of research into. This is what Red Planet is all about, and maybe that can be this week's homework. Like, go into your local community. Doesn't have to be physically. It could even be just like research that you do on Google. 9 times out of 10, if you Google the town that you live in, or even the state that you live in, and add the suffix in the search of like mutual aid, queer mutual aid group, queer activist group, you will find something. You will find something there for you.
Yeah, so, I think just be careful, because we've talked a little bit on here before, and in this episode and in other ones, and even just like if we look at like what has happened in London Pride recently, a lot of people will be like, I want to, support the queer community, so I'm just going to donate to Pride. And then it's like they find out that the Pride group that they've been donating to is actually like super shit, and like let's TERFs march and, all that kind of shit. So just be careful. Like I think pretty much like most places there will be like a really good, like there will be some kind of like grassroots kind of organization, which I would always say prioritize kind of donating to over the bigger ones that like are kind of already out there, and they tend to be a little bit more radical, although there are some larger kind of more radical groups. But just be really careful with Pride stuff in particular, because Pride can be a brand, it can be a business. So that would be, I think that's a good thing. Just try and look for the smaller ones, and you'll probably be able to find something pretty cool, maybe something you can even get involved with directly. But we've got one more question. So Shafiq Mog asks, are there edge cases, times when a company does representation not pinkwashing? What defines the line between support and exploitation? I definitely think there always will be, because that's the nature of things. Like even with like, you know, like the Ben and Jerry stuff, it's like there's a lot of times where it's like seems like, oh yeah, these guys legitimately like do have really progressive views, but just by the nature of being a corporation of that size, they were also doing really shitty stuff. So yeah, you know, and like, yeah, I think there is a lot of times, you know, like the concept of the milkshake duck, when it's like you see something and you're like, yay, like this person is really cool, whatever, and then you find out a minute later that they have a really problematic past or something like that. It's kind of like that with you know, with anytime something blows up, like it's like, you know, a corporation will like put out a big statement, or a movie will say something or whatever, then you look into like the people behind it and you're like, oh yeah, well, you know, this guy is like, you know, a weapons manufacturer, or like the guy that invented drones or something like that.
Also, I think it should be said that no matter how based the people are running the corporation, ultimately queerness is about subverting like white supremacist patriarchal capitalism, right? Queerness is inherently subversive, and to promote capitalism, period, no matter if you're like the most base people running your business, which is obviously far and away better than say Elbit or something. Yeah. Ultimately, I'm of the opinion that like any company that is trying to paint itself as like we're the good guys when it comes to queer liberation ultimately has blood in its hands, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but that's maybe a little militant of me.
Yeah. It is, yeah, it's one of those things, right, where it's like the nature of the wider ecosystem is so oppressive that like, you know, yeah, it's like, you know, what people say, like there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. That's what that means. It doesn't mean like, you know, like there's no ethical consumption, so why try? It means like
you can't be a based
the shitty stuff. Yeah, the shitty stuff is inherent to the system, you know, and we can do as much as possible to abstain from that. But yeah, it's very hard to find a company that is both legit and is also, you know, like really at all levels kind of doing the best they can.
Not to mention that necessarily, I think pinkwashing is kind of an issue in the imperial core, I want to say. I don't know if it's like so much a thing in the imperial periphery.
Yeah,
it's going to depend on which country, because
well, yeah, obviously, but I mean, the pinkwashing that we were talking about today with like, I mean, I whatever, even if it occurs in the imperial periphery.
No. You're right, because a lot of this is something we should point out. A lot of the companies that have these like, you know, rainbow logos every June and stuff like that, if they're like an international corporation and they operate in a company where queer people are not that accepted, you can bet your bottom fucking dollar they don't have that rainbow logo in that company.
Yeah, we've seen this before for I forgot which company was like outed for doing this on Twitter, where if you look at their logo in different countries, some of them were rainbow, some of them were not rainbow.
It's pretty much all of them. It's pretty much fucking all of them. Yeah.
Now, so that plus the fact that companies in the imperial core are routinely exploiting the imperial periphery, which is inherently not queer at all. Not only because you're perpetuating capitalism on like a really horrific scale, but also because there's plenty of queer people in those countries that are now being exploited, which is, it's not actually queer liberation. So yeah, for all these reasons, I think that pinkwashing is something that certain companies do outrageously more than others. But I think on some level, if a corporation is posing itself as some sort of, if you buy our product, that's a step towards queer liberation, is inherently this is inherently a lie.
Yeah. There's someone in the chat saying that they think it was Bethesda that was changing
oh, it
the
was
logo,
it?
which also pointed out, Conrad mentioned to us earlier that there was there's a case recently where there was like a trans member of staff for Bethesda who transitioned and then got locked out of all of the systems when their name changed, and they were just like, well, just deal with it and just use your old name, and they were like, well, That sucks. But
we here at Bethesda cannot understand how one would use a computer to change your name in our system.
Can you imagine them like, and then being like, oh yeah, and by the way,
I can kind of believe
onto the
actually.
rainbow branded Twitter account and and post the pride message for us, our lone trans employee. Yeah.
So cringe. So unbelievably cringe.
Yeah, very cringe. I think that's the last.
I think that's all the questions. Yeah.
That's
so
it.
let's first of all, thank you, Tim, for organizing this stream. All the content and for also for Mule for your really amazing input. I learned a lot about queerness from you, so I really appreciate everything you said today. It was very, very interesting and very educational, and I think I speak for everyone that is listening or watching right now. I don't know if we have any homework to assign to our chat whores.
That one that we said before, have a little look and see what, queer mutual aid groups, queer community groups exist in your area. Just do a little Google, or perhaps the next time you're at an action, you can ask around and be like, hey, I'm looking for some like queer advocacy groups. And you know what? If one doesn't exist in your area, you know what we're going to say, folks? Start one up. So yeah, there you go.
I love the way you say Google. Google.
If you want to see more of the hosts and what we do, Tim, why don't you tell people where we can find you?
You can find me here or over on YouTube as Conquest of Dread, or you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky as Dread Conquest. Yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm going to be going away for a couple of weeks though, so you won't find me here. But yeah, I'll be back in a couple of weeks, just going to Australia. So I'll see you all then. What about you, Mule? Where can we find you?
You can also find me on Blue Sky. It's the new cool place to be. It's DJ Mule. It's just DJ Mule. You'll just find me at DJ Mule. And I'm also on Linktree, so linktree.ee/DJ MUEL. You can find my Patreon there, which is the important one. My Twitch. I do Twitch streams Monday to Thursday. I've recently been sick, like I've said, but I'm coming back to Twitch streams this week, so that'll be really, really cool. Come stop on by. We have a fun time. We talk about politics and how aliens are communists. They definitely are. Don't ask me any questions about that. They definitely exist, and they are communist. Kara,
what about ghosts? What are they?
Ghosts are real. I don't know if they're communists.
Ghosts are real, but what are they? Communists is my question.
I don't know if they're communists. I don't know. I can't.
Depends on the ghost.
If you don't know, then no one knows.
It's true. It's true. I'm the expert on all this stuff. So Kira, where can we find you?
You can find me at twitch.tv/Kira Chats. I also have some scandalous extracurricular work that I pursue that you can find links to on my Linktree. So linktra.ee/Kira Chats. That's available on my Twitter, by the way, twitter.com/Kira Chats, which apparently Elon Musk wants to rename to X. That's his latest thing. He's gonna launch it as X, and now instead of tweeting, we're Xing. So that's gonna be great. So find me on the X Twitter site. Anyways, I'm also on Blue Sky, so bluesky.com/Kira Chats. Kira Chats everywhere, and because I'm like a major loser, I'm like almost always hanging out on Discord with my community. I don't know why I do this, but it's discord.gg/Kira Chats. Hang out there. We have movie nights and all sorts of stuff, so it's really fun. And last but not least, Sophie. Where can we find Sophie?
Sophie, she's all over linktree.ee/Sophie from Mars, patreon.com, and Sophie from Mars, all one word. Obviously YouTube as well. And twitch.tv is Sophie_FRM_Mars. And I think that's also true for another of the sites that she's on. But if you just go to the Linktree, you will find all of our sweet, beautiful Sophie stuff all over the internet. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching. It's been a cool show. Thank you for listening. It's fingers. No one knows what this is.
Yeah, why did we do that?